Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's that time again. Time to talk more about heart attacks. If you're thinking, heart attacks? This is a channel on menopause. Then you're way behind. Heart attacks are the biggest killer of menopausal women, and I want to do everything I can to make sure you know how to prevent one. So this is video 175, and it is the 16th video on heart attacks. We started this unit in video 160. Last week, I told you all about the vitamins, minerals, and supplements that can reduce your risk of heart attack. One of them was calcium. And every time I present calcium as a means of helping to prevent a heart attack, someone always asks, what about coronary artery calcium? Doesn't that make calcium bad for your heart? So this video is all about coronary artery calcium. You see, I try to anticipate all your questions in advance, and I create videos in just the right order to answer your questions, hopefully before you even have to ask them. If you watch my videos in order, starting with the very first one, you will see that I make things really easy for you. So if you're at higher risk for a heart attack than you'd like, and you would like to reduce your risk for a heart attack, or if you just want to understand about the role of calcium in your heart, you should watch this video. Back in video 161, I taught you that heart attacks are caused by a buildup of fats in your heart arteries that create a roadblock that prevents blood and oxygen from reaching your heart. It's a lot like a hose that gets a kink in it, just like that. I showed you this model here, and it's a representation of your heart arteries with increasing degrees of fat buildup inside the artery. But fat isn't the only component of the stuff that clogs your arteries. That roadblock actually consists of two things: fat and calcium. There's a special name for fat and calcium when they exist together in your arteries. It's called plaque. Plaque starts out soft and waxy, kind of like this Play-Doh. But over time, it starts getting a little harder, kind of like this Play-Doh that's starting to dry a bit. And it's the calcium that makes it hard. And that's why we have the term hardening of the arteries. And when women hear that there's something called coronary artery calcium, they assume that taking calcium is bad for their arteries. It isn't. They confuse the calcium that is important for proper electrical activity of your heart with the calcium that combines with fat to form plaque in your arteries. So let's talk about the difference between the two and the significance of hard calcium plaques in your arteries. Last week, I told you that you need 400 to 1200 milligrams of calcium daily for maintaining the electrical activity of your heart. That calcium needs to come from either your diet or from supplements. Nothing about what we discussed today changes what you learned in the last video. The calcium you ingest from your diet or from supplements does not end up in your heart arteries. The calcium that ends up in your heart arteries is plaque calcium, and it's the product of aging, not ingesting. Here's what happens. Most of the calcium you ingest gets dissolved in your blood. Less than 1% of it might remain undissolved. When it does remain undissolved, it gets filtered through your kidneys. That's what kidney stones are, undissolved calcium. But the calcium that collects in plaque is a result of aging. As we age, we get calcium deposits in many parts of our bodies. Some women have calcium deposits in their breasts. And those don't get there as a result of ingesting calcium any more than the calcium in arterial plaque does. So to some degree, calcification of your arteries and other things is a natural part of aging. But here's the catch. Calcification in your arteries is a reflection of how much fat is in your arteries. In other words, it's a way of measuring the fats that cause roadblocks in your arteries. And the reason anyone focuses at all on the calcium in your arteries is simply because calcium is easy to see on x-rays. You can't see fat on x-rays. So the calcium is merely a tool to help define the severity of the fat buildup in your arteries. So there are a bunch of names for the tests that measure how much calcium you have in your arteries. And while they all have names that mention calcium, it's really not the calcium that's the problem. It's the fat. Here's an analogy. Let's say McDonald's wants to know how much soda pop their customers are drinking. Or more accurately, McDonald's really wants to know how much soda pop their customers are buying. Well, the easiest thing for McDonald's to do in order to get that information is to just count the number of cups they use. They aren't concerned with the cups themselves. They're concerned with what the cups represent. The cups represent soda pop sales, and they're concerned with soda pop sales. But since the number of cups used is a good indicator of soda pop sales, they focus on the cups. That's how it is with assessing the quantity of calcium in your heart arteries. It's really not about the calcium itself. It's about the fat buildup. The degree of fat buildup determines your risk for a heart attack. But it's easier to assess calcium than it is to assess fat. So here are some of the names of tests that assess how much calcium you have in your heart arteries. There's coronary artery calcium, because your heart arteries are called coronary arteries. There's coronary calcium scan, coronary calcium score, calcium scan test, cardiac CT for calcium scoring, and heart scan. They're all the same thing, and they're all looking for calcium that is mixed in with the fat in your arteries, simply because it's easier to see the calcium than it is to see the fat. Okay, so you might ask if the calcium has any significance at all. Well, it does. The calcium reflects how hard your arteries are. The harder your arteries, the higher your risk for a heart attack. If we use our Play-Doh to demonstrate, this Play-Doh is soft, waxy, and contains very little calcium. I can deform it very easily. This Play-Doh is somewhat harder, and I can't actually deform it, but it's not so hard that I can't indent it with my fingers. So it contains more calcium than our first Play-Doh sample. It would have a higher calcium score than the first one. And this Play-Doh is rock hard. Its calcium score would be very high. I can't deform it at all. And along with how hard each Play-Doh sample is, the risk of heart attack increases accordingly. This one is low risk, this one is medium risk, and this one is high risk. So the quantity of calcium in your heart arteries is merely another measure of how high your risk is for a heart attack. Remember video 168 in which I discussed risk calculators for a heart attack? There are so many things like this these days. People like to have numbers associated with, well, everything. We've got Fitbits to count your steps. We've got grading systems for malignant tumors. We even have a scale from 1 to 10 for assessing how hot a person is. For some people, having a number is more meaningful than just having facts. So all these tests that designate how much calcium you have in your arteries give you a score to determine your risk. But it's really no different than looking at that list of risk factors for a heart attack that I gave you in video 167. Here's that list again. The purpose of that list is for you to determine how many of the risk factors apply to you. The more you have, the higher your risk. But for some people, that list isn't enough. They may not acknowledge that some of the factors apply to them, or the risk factors may not be enough to compel them to change their diet and lifestyle or to take a medication. For them, a numerical coronary artery calcium score may be more meaningful. So when and if you ever get a coronary artery calcium score, here's how you interpret it. Each score translates into how high your risk is for a heart attack. Here's a chart showing you the risk levels. A coronary calcium score of 0 is very low risk. It means that you have a less than 5% likelihood of having a heart attack in the next 3 to 5 years. A coronary calcium score of 1 to 10 is low risk. It means you have a less than 10% likelihood of a heart attack in the next 3 to 5 years. A coronary calcium score of 11 to 100 is still low risk. It means you have a 10 to 30% likelihood of a heart attack in the next 3 to 5 years. A coronary calcium score of 101 to 400 is moderate risk, giving you a 30 to 50% likelihood of a heart attack in the next 3 to 5 years. And a coronary calcium score greater than 400 is high risk, meaning you have a greater than 50% likelihood of a heart attack in the next 3 to 5 years. Studies do show that women who take HRT tend to have a lower coronary artery score than those who don't. And this makes sense given the fact that loss of estrogen is what causes your arteries to start aging. It also makes sense given the fact that it's the loss of estrogen that causes hardening of the arteries. Hardening of the arteries is aging of the arteries. So, do you need a coronary calcium score? Well, that depends on you. If the list of risk factors tells you what you need to know, then you don't need one. If you need more proof of your risk, then maybe you do need one. If you have some degree of risk but are uncertain of the best treatment and a coronary calcium will help determine your treatment, then maybe you need one. But you should only get this or any other test when there's a clear benefit to getting it. If coronary calcium score will not help provide any useful information, then you should skip it. You might have insurance that will not give you a lipid-lowering drug unless you have a coronary artery calcium score. In that case, you may need to get one in order to get the medication you need to lower your risk of a heart attack. And you know how I'm always telling you that you have to weigh the benefit against the risk? Well, this is no different. Coronary artery calcium tests involve some radiation. It's not high-dose radiation like radiation therapy. It's the quantity of radiation you would normally be exposed to over an entire year. But here are some of the reasons why you would skip it. If you're young and probably have too little calcium to detect, since calcium in your arteries is related to aging, you probably don't need to get it. If you're at low risk for a heart attack. If you already know you're at high risk for a heart attack. If you already have symptoms of heart disease. Or if you've already had a coronary calcium test. If you do get a coronary calcium test, be sure you do it in a facility that is connected with your doctor. And be sure to find out if it's covered by your insurance. And make sure your doctor gets the results and interprets them. The bottom line is that this is just one more tool for determining your risk for a heart attack. And the goal is to find out if you're at significant risk and then do what you can to lower your risk. So that does it for coronary artery calcium. And next week, we'll surge ahead with options for lowering your risk for a heart attack in the herbal and botanical category. Between now and then, I'll see you on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Be sure to subscribe, and if you need a consultation, schedule one at menopausetailor.me. Bye.